Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unit21 Showcase, AI-powered tools for investigations and insights. If you came to learn about the application of AI for risk and compliance teams, you're definitely in the right place. I'm Ross Warnloff, Marketing Director here at Unit21, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. A few quick housekeeping items before we kind of dive into today's program. First, this session is being recorded and will be shared on Monday of next week. And second, we'll be hosting a live Q&A at the end of today's session. So please be sure to use the question submission feature to submit any questions that you may have on any of the topics that come up today. So quick little overview of Unit21 for those who may not be as familiar. We were founded in 2018, and our mission is pretty simple. We help stop bad actors to deliver justice and safety to the world. We do that by helping financial institutions and fintechs and other organizations fight fraud and stay in compliance with our no-code, easy-to-configure platform. How are we doing against that mission? Well, a few quick highlights. In 2023 alone, we helped our customers monitor 4 billion events, 2.77 trillion transactions, and detected 4.3 billion in fraud. So compared to the year prior, this represents a pretty big jump in both the total volume fraud detected and SARs filed for our risk and compliance customers, all while helping cut alert handling time in half. But specifically for today, and really why everyone is here, we'll dive into the application of AI for investigations and insights into your data. First, we'll provide an overview of the AI landscape and some key principles applied by Unit21. Then we'll spend the majority of our time showcasing two exciting examples of Unit21's AI with product overviews and in-platform demos. And lastly, we'll finish up fielding any questions folks may have with our Q&A session at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kunal, our head of product. Kunal, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Why don't you take a few moments to share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Hi, everyone. My name is Kunal. I'm the head of product here at Unit21. Been here for almost 2 years or so, working on different parts of the platform. I'm very excited to show you some of what we're working on now.
Wonderful. All right. Well, let's dive into it.
All right. So right now, as you all know, and I'm sure that's why you all are likely here, AI is sort of a hot topic, and with some of the advances recently, especially around LLMs, we've seen significant opportunity in this space of sort of risk and compliance tooling and the use of these tools for that. We've already been investing heavily in AI, since the inception of the company. But some of these new technologies have given us some very cool new ideas, and we have some pretty cool stuff to show you today. So some things over here you see sort of this AI arms race sort of going on, alluded to earlier, especially with this rising new technologies around LLMs. And there's this report, the famous report in December of last year, which has shown that 71% of FIs are using AI and ML against fraud, and 90% of financial institutions are saying that ease of integrating and that expertise is the reason for choosing a vendor to go with when implementing these technologies.
Awesome. And this is a great time to ask the crowd, if you're here, you're likely interested in AI, you've got potentially some existing AI programs that you're currently running. What do you view as the biggest barriers to deploying AI? Kunal, do you want to kind of walk through, some of these probably don't need much additional color, but how, based on your conversations with our customer base, maybe just kind of provide a little bit of guidance on security versus lack of transparency and what you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of these are some of the biggest concerns that we have seen, and which is why we sort of put them as, options here. Sort of curious to see what the group here has to say, of course. Security especially has been a big concern around the use of LLMs. A lot of the questions that we get are around like, how is the data, or is it being used to train these public models? How is data being shared? What does data retention look like? Around transparency, this is sort of an age-old concern around machine learning, even sort of older technologies, but even some of the new stuff here around like black box models. Can I explain this to an auditor if somebody comes in? Can I see why somebody made a decision? And that ties into automation bias as well. This one comes up less, but on our side, it's really deeply rooted in our principles, which I'll talk about in a moment. And I think it's something very important to bring up, especially now, is when a model is good, which is of course the goal of when we're building models, we want to make sure that they perform well. There's also a downside to that. It's like fire. It can either cook food or it can also burn you. Or a knife, it can cut a person, but it can also cut food. So a tool can be useful, but it also has a negative side. And it's the same with machine learning and AI, where if the model is too good, people can start to trust it so much that they'll either omit things that the model omitted or make the same mistakes just following the model blindly. So these are some of the main concerns that we brought up, and I'm looking at the results here. It looks like security is one of the biggest concerns coming up from this group. So I'll make sure to address that a little bit, as well as then looks like transparency comes next. And then followed by automation bias. So this is certainly interesting results, and good to hear from the group. All right. So let's talk a little bit about our AI principles here at Unit21. So we have 5 principles around AI, and I'll talk briefly about each of them. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A thing, and we'll go and sort of answer them systematically. The first one is expand your vision. So what this means is, one of Unit21's core strengths is sort of bring in whatever data you want, right, and use it. We've seen actually, and I'll talk a little bit about this as well, around like some of our machine learning models, they perform significantly better when people send in custom data into Unit21. So what is custom data? For those of you who are not familiar, it's normally there's sort of transaction. Let's take the example of a transaction. You might have a sender, a receiver, a date, an amount, a currency, sort of standard stuff. But you might also want to add additional information that is unique to your business to that transaction. And so given that businesses are sort of different, right, and therefore the data is different, it is important to look beyond what we think are expected predictors for a type of fraud or type of bad activity in general. And so making sure that when we're building these models, we're actually expanding that vision and looking beyond things that might normally be expected in the space to figure out like what is actually the best predictor, like digging for that truth rather than what we might expect. The second one here is appreciate uniqueness. I touched upon it a little bit before, but again here, like unique business models. Businesses are unique, and the data that is produced is a reflection of a business model. And so we want to make sure we're recognizing that uniqueness of individual businesses. And the way that manifests itself is with unique results, depending on the business that you have. And sometimes, depending on the feature, even a unique model for particular business types or even for particular businesses. The third one is transparency. So this was one of the concerns here, lack of transparency. So making sure that anything we design is easily explainable and understandable to the person who's using it. So making sure we're designing for trust and for clarity. And trust, that's sort of an interesting topic in itself, could probably have a whole webinar just on that. But the idea there is like systematically building that trust with the user rather than expecting the trust from the get-go. The fourth one here is be safe. I alluded to this briefly earlier on design on automation bias. It seems like this is about, we have 25% of folks saying that this is sort of a concern. Automation bias, generally speaking, there's many forms of automation bias, but it comes in mainly 2 forms. There's errors of commission and errors of omission. The thing here is when a model gets really, really good, right, especially when it's being used at like scale, or like, let's say I'm an agent or an analyst, right? And I see the results of a model, one alert after another, and every day I'm living in the platform, working alerts, right? Over time, this is not due to any sort of malintent on anyone's part, but just sort of human nature. We tend to start to trust something that we see over and over again, especially if it matches our initial judgment. And there's a downside to that trust. The downside here is that, if somebody trusts a model too much and the model doesn't catch something, right, the model omits something, the human will tend to, over time, also omit that. So just ignore anything that the model did not catch. And on the other side of it, there's errors of commission, which is when the model catches something, rather than thinking about whether the model should have caught it or not, over time, the agent or the analyst will start to trust that and flag it as suspicious, even if there is significant reason not to do so had there not been a model. And so making sure that we're designing against bias, in the user experience is really important to us, but also making sure we're measuring, constantly the results and the decisions that people are making as compared to model results, to make sure that we can flag internally, so when bias is occurring, and then adjust our designs accordingly. That's a pretty big one, especially now, I think, and we'll talk a little bit about how we're addressing that in some of our features today. And then finally, be systematic. Level 0 through 5, for those of you who are not familiar, this is sort of borrowed from the world of self-driving cars, where level 0 means you drive your car just like sort of normal, right? No automation, nothing. And level 5 is all the way at the end of the spectrum, where it's completely automated. And you can sort of go to sleep in the back of your car, or read a book, or whatever suits your fancy. But in between level 0 and level 5, there's all these other levels, 1, 2, 3, and 4, of various levels of conditional automation or partial automation. So a good example of this with a car might be like lane assist, or sort of the little beep that goes off when you're about to, there's a car coming on your left side, little suggestions, right? All the way to something like automated braking, if somebody is in front of you and you're going too fast. And it's the same with really any kind of automation you can find analog. So starting with suggestions and slowly weaning off the human involvement, and making sure that we're not jumping to level 5 blindly, but instead thinking critically about whether level 5 is the right answer in a particular case. So making sure we're moving systematically through those levels rather than just jumping all the way, even if it is technically possible to do. So these are our 5 AI principles here at Unit21, and I'll sort of talk through as we go through the features how they apply to each of them.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kunal. I think that provides some important context into what we're about to jump into, and some of the specific applications of AI for our risk and compliance customers. I think now's the time everyone's been waiting for. Let's show them what we got. Kunal, why don't you kick us off with Ask Your Data?
Great. So there's 2 features we're going to talk about today. One of them is Ask Your Data, and the other one is the AI Copilot. The Ask Your Data, this is sort of like an AI data analyst, and the AI Copilot, you can think of it like an AI mentor, and we'll talk a little bit about both. So we'll start with the Ask Your Data feature. So normally, first of all, what we've seen is that some of the highest performing risk and compliance teams are those teams which are data-driven. May sound obvious, but it is. We found it to certainly be true, and you can actually tie that to like reporting stats, like the people who do reports more often through Unit21, the people who actually look at their data more frequently tend to have higher true positive rates, lower false positive rates, things like that. And of course, there's a lot more data there. We're happy to dive into more if anyone has questions. But what we realized here was, okay, this is clearly important to the performance of a program. So what can we do to make this really easy? Now, normally, when you want to do some sort of analysis, what this involves is a few different things, right? First of all, you need to know what sort of question you want to ask. This normally we sort of gloss over it. Like, of course, I know what question I want to ask, but maybe there are things that we didn't know we wanted to know, the unknown unknowns, right? how do I know what the right question is? Maybe I've been in the, in the space, I have some experience, but are there things in the data that are not, that I would not have found um, otherwise, like just through my own experience? And this is one of the key problems that this solves. The next step usually is, I'll figure out what is the data that I need. And that involves some sort of expertise in what that data is, like what do the fields mean? What kind of data do I even have available to me? Then I need to know how to put it all together. Usually what that looks like is either a stock dashboard that we have in Unit21, like we have a whole set of, templates, of course, like based on common questions. But sometimes, and we've seen with companies with more sort of advanced data analytics capabilities, there's either a BI team or an analytics team, or maybe a data analyst who takes that data, puts it into some, maybe it's Excel, something like that, creates some sort of charts, looks at those charts, and then comes up with some sort of hypothesis. Okay, like this is what we're seeing. These are the patterns based on the analysis. And this we call the sort of like a post analysis. So it's once you have already done your visualization, or once you've uncovered the patterns, now you explain those. Like, what is it that we found, and now how can I act on it? And this series of steps is, of course, all manual. It's sort of, that's just been the way it is, for the past who knows how many years. So this is sort of what we're addressing here is, can we automate? The question we were asking was, is there a way for us to automate this entire flow of like data analysis to make it really easy, so we can make teams make it really easy to be data driven? So there's a few different things here, and I'll walk into an actual platform demo as well, but one of them is sort of this data interaction, right? You can actually talk to your data with this feature, like as though it were a data analyst. Privacy is, of course, a concern. This is leveraging our partnership with OpenAI. And so we want to make sure that the way we're sort of handling this is a few different things. One of them is we're not sharing all data. It is only data that you choose to send to OpenAI, and we've sort of built that in to the interaction. But also, this data is not being used to train any public LLMs, public models. Then there's finally this data visualization. So this comes in a few different ways, right? Like, of course, pie charts, line graphs, bar graphs, like any sort of visualization that the AI, of course, thinks is relevant, but also explanations in text of what is actually going on with that data. I think with that, I can actually, I'll share my screen and walk you through what this feature looks like in Unit21. And again, feel free to ask questions, and we'll sort of monitor them on the side as we go through. All right, let's take a look. Share screen. Great. So what you're looking at here is the reporting page within Unit21 in this sort of demo environment. Now, where do these reports come from? Just a brief background for those of you who are not familiar with the platform. Pretty much anywhere in our app, like whether it's alerts, cases, detection models, filings, the data explorer, you can generate reports. And these reports have whatever data is you have sent in, right? We make those key data fields available to you in these reports, which you can get either as Excel or CSV. What you're looking at here is the centralized place, the reporting page, where all of those reports sort of end up, right? So you can find one place in the app where you can see all of your reports in one place. And then you can download them. That's sort of the common pattern that we've seen that I was mentioning before. People will download them, play with them in Excel, create their own customized reports, that kinds of things. There's a bunch of other reporting capabilities we have. Not going to get into that at the moment, but starting here, because this is where we see that reporting traffic. Once you go here, you can look at one of these files, and you see this little magnifying glass. And this is the new feature, Ask Your Data. You can also access it from the top here. I'll just click here for a second to show you. It'll select a particular file. So this is what I meant when you can select what data you want to send or you want to report on, right? So in this case, this is the example of the entity CSV. I have another example as well of the alerts, which we'll walk through. And we have some suggested, questions that you can ask. You can click one of these and actually get a response. And I sort of went ahead and did that for the alerts CSV. And scroll to the top and just see, like, what is the question that I asked here? Notice I asked, are there any notable patterns or trends? There was no specific question. I didn't ask, hey, how many alerts were generated over time, or like, what was my average handle time? Although I could have, of course, asked those questions as well, and it can certainly answer those specific things. But I think this is a very interesting one because this is something that's not generally possible today unless you have a human doing this for you, right? Hey, are there any patterns? So just ask this question, are there any patterns? And it starts off by telling you a little bit about what the data is. So one of the principles was designed for transparency. And so this is sort of in our design, right? Like we want to make sure we're explaining the work, not just jumping straight to a conclusion. To sort of make sure that whoever is looking at this is sort of still thinking critically and looking at all the results is able to explain it later on. You'll see it tells you what's in the file, what the data seems to have. It'll go through each of the column names to tell you like what those things mean, right? Which is one of the key steps that you have to do either way. And then it'll say, okay, here are some things you asked for, some notable patterns or trends. Here are some things we could look at. Let's take a look at these. So it says for distribution of alert types, number of alerts over time, status and disposition, any common red flags. No, these are not hard-coded. This is dependent on the question that you ask and the data that you ask it on. So in this case, it was asked on alerts. I asked a question, notable patterns or trends, and it gave me these things because this is what it thinks are interesting in the data, not because we coded it to look at these, which I think is particularly interesting because it's highly contextual. So it shows me a little visualization in this case on distribution of alert types. This one is number of alerts over time, right? You can see this little spike here. And then it'll go into some observations of the file, like what's actually going on here with certain insights, as well as if you sort of go down, that post analysis, like once I've looked at this data, what else can I find? There's 4 files in this one CSV, this one export. It's not just one file, so it can actually look across multiple files to find patterns across all the files rather than just one. This would normally take a data analyst who is familiar with the data to figure out like, okay, how can I put these files together to come up with some sort of interesting insight? And so it'll analyze all those files one after the other. And then of course, like as we go through this, you can ask follow-up questions like the one I asked here, can you recommend a rule for me to reduce false positives? And lo and behold, here you go. And one thing we're encouraging folks, like if you are a Unit21 user today, is you can play around with this feature. Just go to the reporting tab, see if it's there. If you want to know more about it and it's not turned on for you at the moment, we can go ahead and do that. Just reach out. I was just playing around here. It's like, could you predict what kinds of future alerts? And it actually went and did sort of analysis here to try and figure out, can it predict ahead of time? And giving me some sort of techniques, to sort of go ahead and do that, as well as doing the analysis itself. All right, so this is our feature, Ask Your Data. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the questions and answers section. We're now going to move on to the second feature here that we're talking about. And note, these are 2 features that are currently out there in production. There's a bunch of other things we're working on as well, which I'll briefly talk about towards the end. So this one is, we call it the AI Copilot. You can think of this, if the last one was sort of an AI data analyst, this one is sort of like an AI mentor. We think about our AI in terms of these personas that sort of help you along the way, right? So the idea here is, what we've seen is, especially with larger teams, but it happens actually across the board with, risk and compliance folks. As I'm sure you all know, like ensuring quality and is for like the kinds of things that your analysts are doing or making sure they're following procedures can be really important. But also making sure that they're thinking critically about like, what is it that's in this on this alert? Like, how do I know that this thing is suspicious or not suspicious? How are you actually making that decision? Normally, this takes a lot of training, right? And that training means either you go through some sort of training procedures, on your own side, you have some sort of documented procedures which they're expected to go through as they're updated, that kind of thing. But it also takes experience, right? Like you have to have seen a lot of these before to know like, okay, this is what I probably should be looking for. And so that's what this feature is all about, is it's sort of like this mentor that sits alongside you telling you, hey, you should probably take a look at this because this is probably what this is. It's likely true positive, right? Or likely false positive. And this is why. And so that explainability, that transparency is something that's key for us as well. So sort of this contextual guidance is what it provides to you. It is tailored to your data. So another one of our principles there, right? Appreciate that uniqueness. Every business is different. And the data you send us, therefore, is also different. So we want to make sure that these are not just stock recommendations, right? But they're actually tailored to your particular business model. And so that's what this is. The underlying model that looks at this will look at all the data that you send in. We've seen it perform significantly better with folks that send in more data, especially custom data to Unit21 that's unique to your business. And it'll actually go ahead and tell you like, hey, this is what the recommended thing is. And then that's sort of that transparency and explainability piece. I'll briefly go into a demo within the platform. So I have two examples here, one of a true positive and one of false positive. This is an alert. The alert page, again, it's in our demo environment, so we have a ton of these buttons, which you can probably, you can configure them. Could talk about this as well if anyone has any questions. But this model is also trained off of these buttons. So the decisions that you make actually influence the model itself. So if you see these and this kind of true positive information, and then you say, yes, this is in fact a true positive, it will go back and train that model, which will then again show you those kinds of things, or conversely, right? So this example says, yeah, the count of all distinct IP addresses is 10. That's pretty weird, right? 10 IP addresses for a single transaction, or 14 different countries for the events that have been alerted. That's not, that seems pretty unusual, 14 country codes with the events that have been alerted here for the same entity. And the email address was created 5 minutes prior to the most recent transaction. So a super new email address, 10 IP addresses, 14 different country codes. This is pretty likely a true positive flag. And so this will flag that for you right up front for the analyst to see this so that they can now look for that information and make the decision. Now notice we didn't jump straight to making the decision. Could have done that, but rather than jumping straight to level 5, instead we present this for the analyst to actually think critically about it, make the decision themselves. So there's little bits here and there of like intentional friction that we're adding in to make sure that that critical thinking is still going on. Similar example, this one is for a false positive alert. So the lower alert score suggested disposition false positive. First month after opening the account, they made 3 deposits. Okay, seems reasonable. 2 IP addresses. Okay, that sounds reasonable too. Maybe it's one work, one work and one home or something like that. And then the email address was created a little bit before the most recent flag transaction, so it doesn't seem particularly suspicious, although 720 hours may not be too much time, so it's not a very low score. So it's something, just sort of that it's a spectrum of behavior. And we try to make sure we flag that in as transparent a way as possible. And again, if the analyst then clicks one of the buttons that says, okay, false positive, it'll retrain the model, which will make sure that we're up to date with your particular decisions and your particular data at your company. All right. So to recap all of this, so we talked about our AI principles, right? We want to make sure that we're appreciating that uniqueness, designing for transparency, designing against bias, right? And you saw sort of how we went through those in each of the features. We talked about Ask Your Data, and then AI Copilot, which is sort of that mentor. If you were interested in seeing any more of these, or not only these features, but anything else that we're working on, some other stuff, just quickly, I'll tell you about what is coming down the pipe. We're working on things like automated narrative generation, an AI agent, which you can train to actually do specific tasks, like manual repetitive tasks over and over again. Rule recommendations as well is something that we're exploring. We had a feature previously and I'm sort of reworking that, given the new technologies and new advances. So definitely a lot going on here at Unit21 in terms of AI. And if you'd like to learn more, you can go ahead and book a demo on our website or reach out. All right. With that, we can go into some Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Kunal. Well, I've been monitoring Q&A and we've definitely got a lengthy list here. So we'll get to as many as we can. And then if we don't answer your question, we'll be following up with you after this session. So, all right. First question is from Dana, and Dana asks, can you provide some examples of contextual guidance? Will it be different across industries? I work at a credit union, so I'm curious if this feature is geared more towards fintechs.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Dana, for that question. So contextual guidance, I think we talked a little bit about it during, the AI mentor, in particular, the AI Copilot, right? Where as you're going through a particular alert and you're in the context of that alert, it'll guide you through, like, these are the particular data points that you should look for. It sounds like you work at a credit union. Yes, doesn't matter what your business type is, whether you're a bank, credit union, a fintech, or something completely different, honestly. We have marketplace customers as well, like where this kind of thing is still useful because it's independent of our train. It depends on the data that you send us, as well as the decisions that you have configured within your platform, like those buttons, as you have configured them. So it's entirely custom to your particular business, regardless of what that business type is. Hope that answers the question.
Yep. Next up, we've got one from Brad, and Brad says, I don't have a large data science team. Can small organizations implement and benefit from these AI features? So kind of looking for, is this for big companies only, or can small teams take advantage as well?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We found that a lot of bigger companies have generally the resources to have, you know, like a data science team or like a BI team or an analyst team, right? Or even a data analyst that works closely with risk and compliance folks. What this does is it sort of helps you make that process more efficient, but especially for companies which are smaller, I would say, where you don't have that kind of either room or those kinds of people, those kinds of teams. This is particularly helpful because now it sort of does that work for you, depending on the kinds of questions you ask. And actually, with the Ask Your Data feature, even if you don't know the questions to ask, you can say, hey, are there any interesting patterns? And it'll go ahead and tell you that, just like a data analyst would. But you know, in using it, I would, of course, love that feedback and see like what we can do, you know, to particularly address these concerns. But the answer basically is yes. Yeah, I hope that answers it.
Thanks. Yeah. Next one is from Kenya, and Kenya asks, can you explain how Ask Your Data adjusts to different levels of user experience? Can less tech-savvy users gain insights?
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually designed in particular for less tech-savvy folks, like who may not have familiarity with, say, SQL or Python or even Excel, honestly. You know, the idea here is you should be able to just ask your questions in plain English in a way that you would normally speak to another human, and be able to talk to your data in that way. And then we will do the work to make sure that we can figure that into some sort of query that will actually run and turn into some useful insight for you. The interesting thing here, I think, is especially for folks without that technical background, iteration on the question is particularly important. You ask one question, you will get a result. You might think, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted. And so what we provided here is this chat interface where you can actually talk again, like respond, hey, that's not what I was looking for. I would rather have this instead. And it will adjust to what you have asked to make sure that you're getting the answers that you're looking for.
Great. All right, I knew this would come up. Let's talk about security and privacy. So Susan asks, can you elaborate on the specific privacy measures Unit21 implements? How do you protect sensitive data?
Great question. So the two features that we talked about have slightly different implementations. So with the AI Copilot, as it is today, no data is shared outside of Unit21. This is entirely within. Everything that you send us stays within us. And the models are trained again within Unit21 entirely. There are some features that we're working on here around like automated narrative generation. Like, can you take these bullet points, right, and turn it into a narrative? And that would require then sending it to sort of OpenAI as the company we're working with for the LLM. Similar now, Ask Your Data, that one is powered again by a GPT-4 is the model. The data that you're sending across, we would have you know, OpenAI added as a data subprocessor in your agreement. But to make sure, you know, like everything is sort of kosher from the security standpoint, as well as the legal side. But you get to choose what data you send, so you don't have to send everything. That's entirely up to you. And then the data is not used to train the LLMs. So this has sort of been a big concern for a lot of our customers, as well as like, hey, now, like if I go to an LLM and like type in like, hey, can you tell me about Ross's transactions? Will it just spit that out? The answer is absolutely not. It's sort of within the walls using OpenAI's enterprise API. So sort of designed for this kind of use case, not intended not going to train any public models.
Great, thanks for clarifying that. Definitely expected questions around that to come up. Next one, we've got a question from Ron, and Ron asks, are these modules available independently or are they tied to your platform?
That's a really good question. Right now they're tied to our platform. Within Unit21, you have to be a Unit21 user to sort of have them, but it's certainly an interesting area to explore.
Agreed, agreed. All right, it looks like we got the last question here. We've been rolling through these pretty efficiently. Does this feature work in real time on a per transaction basis to spot unusual transactions?
Spot on, I see. That's a good question. So we have, for unusual transactions, there's a different model, which we have not spoken, we didn't talk about that today. Sort of more traditional ML model focused on transactions only. It's actually out there now and it's available in real time. So sub-second, like actually 250 millisecond response time on the results on the transaction, specifically right now for ACH. Transactions for sort of funds availability use case. So like you want to make sure that the likelihood of a return is low before you trigger that. So yes, we do have models that run on transactions. These two, the Ask Your Data, of course, is sort of more data analytics, right? You're looking on data that you have either on your customers or whatever entities you're working with, or alerts or cases, that kind of thing. Whereas the AI Copilot is more on the alert itself. As a human is looking at it, it's intended for them to have sort of that contextual guidance. But for that real-time risk scoring, we also do have models for that. So happy to, you can set up a demo. We can chat more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Kunal. And just to reiterate, if you have any additional questions about what we covered today, best next step would be visit us at unit21.ai, request a demo. We'd be happy to provide a personalized walkthrough of what these features might look like for your organization and for your risk and compliance teams. So with that, I think it's time to adjourn. Again, thank you, Kunal, for spending some time with us. Thank you for everyone in the audience who spent their Friday morning or afternoon with us. This recording will be sent out early next week in case you want to circulate it to other colleagues on your team or within your organization. And with that, I bid everyone adieu. Have a great weekend.